David, we're here now in the front parlor of this house, and let's you help me. We'll review a little history. The Merles came at the time of the Trail of Tears. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And the house was, they lived in a log cabin first on the site,
Right.
on this site.
Lewis Ross had purchased a cabin from an old settler family who was living in the area for George and Minerva to live in.
And then the house was really built for Minerva.
Right.
It was her house,
I
and
do believe it was Minerva's house, yes.
it was Minerva's house. And the furnishings in this parlor are in the Ross family. Is that correct?
Right. We all throughout the furnishings in the house, we have a collection of pieces that belong to the Ross family. We have pieces that belong to the Merles,
Right.
both George and
Right.
and Minerva. So.
Right. And Minerva passed away in 1855,
Right.
possibly of malaria.
Right.
And perhaps in the retrospect, it spared her the devastation of the Civil War, because when the Civil War came along, the family, I read in some of the history that the second wife, Amanda, who was Minerva's younger sister,
Right.
and the son, who was born in this house,
Yes, ma'am.
were taken back east when Chief John Ross, but then George was able to get them through the lines and get them to Virginia. Is that correct?
Right. Whenever the war started to turn bad in this area, George, being of course a native Virginian, went back to Virginia to support the Virginia war cause.
Yes.
And we don't have any records that he was actually fighting, but with his skills as a merchant, he was probably obtaining goods for the commissary department for the Army of Northern Virginia. So they had gone back to Lynchburg.
And the family never lived here after that. George and Amanda, then their
Right.
family. They did visit, I believe, after the war at some point.
Correct.
But Chief John Ross's sister, Elizabeth Ross, who had married John Golden Ross, who was not a relative, but
Right.
she and her daughters were in the house
Right.
during the Civil.
Yeah. E. Jane Ross.
Yes.
And yeah, they lived in the house and looked after the furnishings and the pieces that were left here. And they survived several raids, and we have great stories, great letters from E. Jane describing how Stan Wading and his men, when they came through on a raid through Park Hill, had actually broke into the house and ransacked it. They took the blankets, they cut the feather beds apart,
Yes.
and took whatever food that they wanted. And in the process of it, of course, the ladies were living in the dining room,
Mm-hmm.
and so they broke through one of the doors in the dining room, and then broke one of the doors off of the cupboard that
Right.
was in the dining room there, and the family still has that cupboard in Louisiana, and you can see from the pictures of it that the split in the door where they had broken the door at that time is still there. So,
And as I understand from my reading, Elizabeth, the chief's sister, had on a shawl, and Stan Wading even took that
yes, ma'am. Yes,
off her body.
Right.
Because the animosity went back to the Treaty of New Echota in 1835.
Yes, ma'am. And we read a lot about the Civil War and how it had effect on the soldiers, and usually that's the focus of what's going on with a lot of studies. But in reality, the people who were staying behind here in Park Hill really suffered a lot. The war was rough on the civilians in this area.
Oh yes, it was terrible.
And so we do have a unique history there of a lot of letters that were written by the Ross family that stayed behind and tried to ride out the war here. So we have quite a few of those that really tell a good story of what it was like to be a civilian and female and stay behind in this area. So.
And that was not unique to this area. Of course, it was happening in Tahlequah too. They
Right.
suffered terribly. And the people who were Southern sympathizers, if they could get a wagon or a horse or some way to get down into the Choctaw Nation or into Texas,
Right.
they went. And if the ones who were Union sympathizers could get up north, they went, and those who didn't have the possibilities of making that transport had to stay and suffer terribly.
Right. Yeah.
And well, let's talk a little bit more. That's gloomy and that's reality. But I love this room, and I love the portraits. I love the pianoforte, because both Amanda and her and Mary Jane Ross, her sister,
Right.
were pianists, and history records that they were quite good.
Quite good at it, yes, ma'am. We actually have Amanda's music books, and as she would master a piece, she would write the date on it of when she finally mastered that piece, and then later on she had them all bound together. So we have those on that set of music books on display in the library.
In the library,
So-
yes. And since we're in this room, in the front parlor, what can you tell us, or can you, about the silver service on the table?
Well, the silver service is another one of the artifacts that has been recently donated to us by the great granddaughter of Amanda,
And that's
yeah.
wonderful and large and elegant.
It is. It's the piece was made. There's actually 3 pieces to it, but there's a 4th piece that we don't see right off the bat. So the large sugar container, the coffee service, and the tea server are all pieces that were made in New York. And then underneath of the coffee
Yes.
server, you can see that there is a Bunsen burner there.
Yes.
And that piece was made in Philadelphia. So
Really?
you have and all of the manufacturing on those were between 1835 and 1845. The set actually belonged to Rosanna Merle Clater, who was George Merle's sister, and she had married a gentleman who was a little older than her, and they had children. And by the time that the 1860s arrived, she had no heirs left. All of her children had passed. Her husband was gone, and so there was no one to leave her estate to. So George inherited it. So that was a piece that was inherited by George, but it had belonged to his sister.
Had belonged to his sister. All right, so it's no stretch of the imagination then to talk about the fact that George and his wife used that.
Oh yes, I would imagine so.
Well, we have to take another station break, so don't go away. There's more exciting material yet to come.